Security drags black triplets from gate, and moments later their dad, an airline billionaire, arrives. But what happened in those moments between will make your blood boil. The gate agent leaned forward, her voice dripping with contempt. I don't care what your paperwork says. Kids like you don't fly first class. These boarding passes are stolen, and I'm calling security to deal with you little thieves right now. The words hit 12-year-old Amara like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Her twin sister Zuri grabbed her hand, squeezing tight. Their brother Malik stood frozen, his backpack slipping from his shoulder. And here's what nobody wants to admit. Racial discrimination in 2024 isn't some relic we left behind in the 1960s. It's not black and white footage of lunch counters and water fountains. It's happening right now, in airports, in schools, in hospitals, and it's gotten more vicious because now it hides behind policy and procedure. Now it wears a smile and a uniform and calls itself protocol. The civil rights era was brutal and honest. Today's racism is brutal and disguised, which makes it even more dangerous. Amara felt her heart hammering, but she wasn't surprised. Hurt, absolutely. But surprised? This was the fourth time this year someone had looked at her beautiful brown skin and decided she was a criminal. She was 12 years old, and she'd already learned that to some people, being black meant being guilty of something. The scene at Gate 47 of Philadelphia International Airport looked like chaos barely contained. Zuri's hands shook as she tried to pull out their documentation folder. Malik's eyes were already wet with tears he refused to let fall. Around them, Terminal C bustled with Saturday morning travelers, but at their gate, time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does when you know something terrible is about to happen. The gate agent stood with two crew members flanking her like backup, their faces set in judgment. Flight 2847 to Orlando was boarding. Families streamed past, heading to Disney World, heading to beaches, heading to freedom. The triplets were supposed to join their family friends the Thompsons for a weekend of fun. Everything was arranged. Every document for unaccompanied minors was in order. Their father had made sure of it. But none of that mattered now. Zuri's voice cracked. Please, ma'am, if you just look at our... The gate agent cut her off with a hand gesture. I've seen enough. You expect me to believe 3 kids from the hood have first-class tickets? She turned to her colleagues. This is exactly what corporate warned us about. Profiling isn't racism, it's protection. One of the crew members nodded. Those boarding passes look fraudulent to me too. Around them, passengers slowed down. Phones came out. People started recording. But nobody said a word. Nobody stepped forward. They just watched, creating a circle of silent witnesses, their phones held high like this was entertainment instead of 3 children being accused of crimes they didn't commit. Malik finally spoke, his voice small. We're not from the hood. We're from... Where you're from doesn't matter, the gate agent snapped. What matters is I'm not letting you on this aircraft until security sorts this out. Amara felt the walls closing in. They were trapped in this moment, suspended between the life they'd known that morning and whatever nightmare was coming next. The airplane sat just beyond the jetway, so close and yet completely unreachable. Other passengers filed past, avoiding eye contact, pretending not to see. Then the gate agent reached for her radio, and Amara watched her lips form the words that would change everything. We need security at Gate 47. Possible theft. 3 juveniles. And they're being difficult. The radio crackled to life, and Amara heard the response that made her stomach drop. Copy that. Officers en route. If you believe no child should ever be treated like a criminal just because of the color of their skin, keep watching. If you think racial discrimination on airplanes ended decades ago, you need to see what happens in the next few minutes. And if you've ever been profiled, accused, or humiliated because of how you look, drop a comment below and tell us your story. We're reading every single one. Also tell us where you're watching from and what time it is right now because this story is reaching people all over the world. This doesn't end the way you think it will. Hit that like button if you stand against injustice, and subscribe to this channel because we're exposing the incidents that major airlines don't want you to see. What happens next will shock you. But to understand how 3 innocent children ended up surrounded by security guards at Gate 47, accused of being thieves, you need to know who Amara, Zuri, and Malik really are. Because their story didn't start with that gate agent's venom. It started 6 hours earlier, in a beautiful home in the suburbs of Philadelphia, with excitement and careful preparation. Amara, Zuri, and Malik Henderson were 12 years old, 7th graders at Martin Luther King Jr. Middle School, and they'd never been in trouble a day in their lives. Amara was the oldest by 4 minutes, a straight A student who tutored younger kids in math after school. Zuri played violin in the youth orchestra and had just won second place in a regional science fair with her project on renewable energy. Malik was the quiet one, an artist whose drawings had been featured in the school's Black History Month exhibition. Their teachers called them exceptional. Their neighbors called them polite. Their father called them his greatest achievement. They were honor roll students. They volunteered at the community center. They'd never stolen anything, never been suspended, never even gotten detention. They were the kind of kids who said please and thank you without being reminded, who held doors for strangers, who looked adults in the eye when speaking because that's how they'd been raised. With dignity. With pride. With the understanding that they represented something bigger than themselves. This trip to Orlando was supposed to be special. Their father's best friend from college, Marcus Thompson, had invited them to spend the weekend with his family. The Thompsons had 3 kids around the same age, and they'd planned everything. Theme parks, swimming, movie nights, that kind of freedom that 12-year-olds dream about. The triplets had been talking about nothing else for weeks. Their father, James Henderson, had arranged everything meticulously. As a businessman who traveled constantly, he knew exactly what documentation unaccompanied minors needed. Notarized letters of permission. Copies of birth certificates. Contact information for both families. He'd called the airline twice to confirm the process, paid extra for the unaccompanied minor service, and booked them in first class because he wanted them comfortable and well supervised. That Saturday morning, the Henderson household buzzed with nervous energy. Amara triple-checked her carry-on, making sure she had the folder with all their documents. Zuri packed her sketchbook and the book she was reading for English class. Malik carefully wrapped the ceramic mug he'd made in art class as a gift for Mrs. Thompson. Their father drove them to Philadelphia International Airport himself, arriving 2 hours early like he always did. In the car, he'd given them the talk he always gave before they did anything without him. Be polite. Be respectful. If anyone asks you questions, answer clearly. Stay together. Look out for each other. Check-in went smoothly. The woman at the counter smiled at them, commented on how responsible they seemed, and handed them their boarding passes for Flight 2847 with seats 2A, 2B, and 2C. First class, right up front. Security was normal. They took off their shoes, put their bags through the scanner, and walked through the metal detector without any problems. At gate 47, they'd waited like any other passengers. Malik played games on his phone. Zuri read her book. Amara people watched, noticing the families heading to Orlando, wondering if any of them would be at the same parks this weekend. When boarding was called for first class and unaccompanied minors, they gathered their things and walked to the gate agent's podium. That's when everything changed. That's when the gate agent looked at their boarding passes, looked at their faces, and something shifted in her expression. Something cold and suspicious crept into her eyes. She'd scanned Amara's boarding pass twice. Then 3 times. Then she'd called over another crew member. They'd whispered, glancing at the children like they were evidence in a crime scene. The second crew member nodded. Those do look suspicious. The discrimination didn't announce itself with slurs or obvious hatred. It came dressed in procedure and policy. It came with that practiced smile that didn't reach the eyes. It came with the assumption that 3 black children with first-class tickets must have done something wrong to get them. When Amara tried to explain that their father had purchased the tickets, the gate agent's smile had disappeared completely. That's when she'd made the accusation that would shatter their innocence forever. That's when she'd called them thieves. And now, standing at that gate with security on the way, the triplets understood something their father had tried to protect them from for 12 years. No matter how good you are, how polite, how educated, how innocent, to some people you will always be guilty of being black first. The other passengers kept recording, kept watching. Not one person spoke up. Not one person said, wait, these are children. The silence of those bystanders was its own kind of violence, a wall of complicity that told the triplets they were alone in this. Zuri whispered, her voice breaking. What did we do wrong? Amara squeezed her sister's hand tighter, trying to be brave even though her own hands were shaking. We didn't do anything wrong. But in that moment, at gate 47, innocence didn't matter. Documents didn't matter. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the color of their skin and the prejudice in that gate agent's heart. The radio on the gate agent's belt crackled again. Security is 2 minutes out. 2 minutes. 120 seconds until their nightmare truly began. Until they would learn exactly how cruel racial profiling could be. Until they would understand why their father had worked so hard to build a life where his children would never have to experience what he'd experienced growing up. But all that work, all those precautions, all that success couldn't protect them from this moment. The crowd around them grew larger. More phones appeared. The triplets stood in the center of it all, 3 12-year-old children whose only crime was existing while black. And then Amara saw them. 2 security officers in uniform, walking quickly toward gate 47, their expressions already set in that look she'd seen on the gate agent's face. That look that had already decided they were guilty. The security officers moved through the crowd like predators who'd already decided their prey was guilty. Officer Daniels, a tall white man in his 40s with cold blue eyes, reached the triplets first. Officer Chen followed close behind, her hand already resting on her radio like she expected trouble. The gate agent pointed at the children with barely concealed satisfaction. These 3. They have fraudulent boarding passes. I believe they're stolen. Amara's voice shook but she kept it steady. Ma'am, we can show you everything. Our dad bought these tickets. We have all our documents. Officer Daniels didn't even look at her. He looked past her, through her, like she wasn't quite human enough to deserve eye contact. Save it. You can explain at the security office. What happened next would haunt the triplets for the rest of their lives. Officer Daniels grabbed Malik's arm, his grip hard enough to leave marks. Malik, who'd never been touched roughly by anyone in his 12 years, who'd been raised with gentle corrections and patient explanations, felt something break inside him that had nothing to do with bones. We need to go now, Officer Chen said, reaching for Zuri. The crowd of passengers had grown to at least 40 people. Every single one of them had a phone out. Every single one of them was recording. And every single one of them stood silent, watching 3 children be treated like criminals, and did absolutely nothing to stop it. This is what we don't talk about enough when we discuss racial discrimination and profiling. It's not just the people who do it. It's the people who watch it happen and choose silence. Every passenger at gate 47 that day became complicit in what happened next. Their silence gave permission. Their phones captured evidence they'd probably never report. They would go home and maybe feel briefly uncomfortable, but the triplets would carry this trauma forever. Please, Amara said, pulling out the folder of documents with trembling hands. Just look at these. We have everything we need. Officer Daniels snatched the folder from her hands so roughly that papers scattered across the floor. You'll get these back after we verify your story. He pulled out his handcuffs. Zuri's eyes went wide with terror. You're going to handcuff us? Standard procedure for suspected theft, Officer Chen said, and there was something almost apologetic in her tone, but not apologetic enough to stop her from doing it. They handcuffed 3 12-year-old honor students in the middle of Philadelphia International Airport. They handcuffed children who'd never even had a detention. They handcuffed black kids because in their minds, black kids were always potential criminals, always threats, always guilty until proven innocent and sometimes guilty even after that. Malik started crying. He couldn't help it. The humiliation, the fear, the cold metal on his wrists, the stares from all those passengers. He was 12. He was a child. And he was being treated like he'd committed a violent crime. The walk from gate 47 to the security office felt like a death march. Past the food courts where families ate pizza and laughed. Past the bookstores where people browsed magazines. Past the coffee shops where business people typed on laptops. Everyone stopped to stare. Everyone pulled out their phones. No one helped. The security office was a small, windowless room in a restricted area of the terminal. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow. There was a metal table bolted to the floor, for chairs, and cameras in every corner. It felt like an interrogation room because that's exactly what it was. Officer Daniels pushed the triplets into chairs. "Empty your pockets. Everything on the table." With shaking hands, the children complied. Wallets with their school IDs. Malik's art supplies. Zuri's book. Amara's carefully organized folder, now crumpled and incomplete. And their phones. 3 phones that represented their only connection to their father, to safety, to the world outside this nightmare. Officer Chen collected the phones, powering each one down. "You'll get these back when we're done with our investigation." "When can we call our dad?" Amara asked, trying to keep the desperation out of her voice. "When we decide you can," Officer Daniels said. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed. "Start from the beginning. Where did you really get those boarding passes?" "Our dad bought them," all 3 children said in unison. The officer smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd already decided not to believe a word they said. And I'm sure he did. Kids like you always have dads who can afford first-class tickets. Kids like you. Those 3 words contain centuries of racism, generations of prejudice, the assumption that black children from loving homes were somehow less deserving, less truthful, less worthy of basic human dignity than white children would be. Zuri was shaking so hard her chair rattled against the floor. Malik had gone quiet, tears streaming down his face silently. Amara tried to stay strong, tried to think of what her father would tell her to do, but she was 12 years old and terrified and powerless. Outside that room, Flight 2847 to Orlando was boarding without them. Outside that room, the weekend they'd been dreaming about was slipping away. Outside that room, their father had no idea his children were being treated like criminals. And inside that room, the real torture was just beginning. Officer Daniels left the room, muttering something about running their information through the system. Officer Chen stayed behind, standing by the door with her arms crossed, watching the triplets like they might try to escape at any moment. The room felt smaller with every passing minute, the walls closing in, the air getting thicker. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The children sat in those hard metal chairs, still handcuffed, confused and scared and trying to understand what crime they'd committed by existing. Amara kept replaying the morning in her head, searching for what they'd done wrong, but she couldn't find it. They'd done everything right. They'd been polite. They had their documents. They'd followed every rule. And still here they were. Malik whispered, his voice hoarse from crying. "I need to use the bathroom." Officer Chen sighed like he'd asked for something unreasonable. "You can wait." "But I really need to go," Malik said, and his desperation was real. Fear does that to your body. It makes everything urgent and uncomfortable. The officer looked at him for a long moment, then walked over and unlocked his handcuffs. "Make it quick. Bathrooms down the hall, second door on the right. You have 2 minutes." As Malik left, Zuri caught Amara's eye. There was something in her twin sister's expression, something sharp and calculating that Amara recognized immediately. They'd been twins for 12 years. They had their own language, their own understanding. When Officer Chen's radio crackled with some message about another situation in Terminal B, when her attention shifted for just a moment, Zuri made her move. She'd always been the quickest of the 3. The athlete. The one who'd won every race at field day since 3rd grade. She slipped out of her handcuffs, her small wrists sliding through the metal that had been fastened for adults, and she ran. Officer Chen shouted, "Stop." But Zuri was already through the door, her heart pounding, her legs pumping, running like her life depended on it because maybe it did. She didn't have a plan. She just knew they needed help. They needed their father. They needed someone to know what was happening in that terrible room. The restricted area corridor was long and gray. Zuri ran past offices with closed doors, past storage rooms, past other security personnel who shouted at her but didn't immediately give chase because they didn't know what was happening. She burst through a door that said authorized personnel only and found herself in a maintenance area. And there, checking something on an electrical panel, was a black man in his 60s wearing a maintenance uniform. His name tag said Robert Williams. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, surprise crossing his face when he saw this young girl, breathing hard, eyes wild with fear. "Please," Zuri gasped out. "Please, I need help. They took our phones. My brother and sister are back there. We didn't do anything wrong." Robert Williams had worked at Philadelphia International Airport for 37 years. He'd seen a lot in that time. He'd seen discrimination, seen profiling, seen how security treated black folks versus white folks. And he'd sworn to himself that whenever he could help, he would. "What happened, sweetheart?" he asked gently, already pulling out his cell phone. The words tumbled out of Zuri in a rush. The gate agent. The accusations. The handcuffs. The confiscated phones. The room with no windows. Her voice broke halfway through, but she kept going because this might be their only chance. Robert's face hardened with an anger he kept carefully controlled. "What's your daddy's number?" Zuri recited it from memory. They'd all memorized it years ago, back when they first got phones, back when their father had made them practice in case of emergencies. She never thought the emergency would be this. Robert dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a voice answered, professional and slightly impatient. "James Henderson." "Mr. Henderson," Robert said, his voice steady and serious. "My name is Robert Williams. I work maintenance at Philadelphia International Airport. Your daughter just found me. Sir, I think you need to get here right away. Your children are in trouble." There was a pause. Then James Henderson's voice came back, lower now, dangerous. "What kind of trouble?" Zuri grabbed the phone. "Daddy?" The word came out broken, all her fear and relief and desperation packed into those 2 syllables. "Baby girl? What's wrong? Where are you? Where's Amara and Malik?" "They accused us of stealing our boarding passes," Zuri said, tears streaming down her face now that she finally had her father on the line. "They handcuffed us, Daddy. They took our phones. They have us in some room and they won't listen and I'm so scared." The sound James Henderson made was something between a growl and a roar. "I'm 40 minutes away. Baby, I need you to stay with the man who helped you. Don't go back to that room. You hear me? Don't go back." "But Amara and Malik are still there." I know, baby. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to fix all of this. Put Mr. Williams back on." Zuri handed the phone back to Robert, who listened intently as James Henderson spoke. She could hear her father's voice through the phone, rapid-fire instructions, barely controlled rage. That's when Zuri heard the shouting. Multiple voices. Heavy footsteps. Officer Chen's voice cutting through the maintenance area. "She went this way. Find her." Zuri's eyes met Robert's, and in that moment, they both knew. She'd been found. 3 security officers burst through the door, and the look on their faces told Zuri everything she needed to know about what happened to black girls who ran from authority. Officer Chen was in front, her face red with anger and something that looked like embarrassment. Officer Daniels was right behind her. And a 3rd officer, bigger than both of them, blocked the exit. "You made a big mistake," Officer Daniels said, advancing on Zuri. "A very big mistake." Robert stepped between them and the child. "Now hold on. This girl just needed to call her father. That's all. There's no need for—" "Move aside, sir," Officer Chen said. "This doesn't concern you." "The hell it doesn't," Robert said, and his voice carried the weight of 37 years of watching this same scene play out in different forms. "She's a child. She's a suspect who fled custody," Officer Daniels corrected. "And you're interfering with official business." What happened next would be caught on the maintenance area's security cameras, would later be used as evidence, would be shared across social media with millions of views and the hashtag justice for the Henderson triplets. Officer Daniels grabbed Zuri's arm with brutal force, yanking her away from Robert. Zuri cried out in pain. The officer twisted her arm behind her back, forcing her to the ground. Her knees hit the concrete floor hard enough to split the skin. "Stop!" Robert shouted. "She's 12 years old." But they didn't stop. They never stop. That's the thing about racial discrimination in America. It doesn't care about age. It doesn't care about innocence. It doesn't care about humanity. They dragged Zuri back toward that windowless room, her knees bleeding, her shoulders screaming in pain, her heart breaking with the understanding that even running toward help was considered a crime when you were black. And somewhere on the highway, James Henderson was already speeding toward the airport, his phone on speaker, his hands gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white, listening to Robert Williams describe what had just happened to his daughter. The rage building in him was biblical. They dragged Zuri down the corridor like she was a dangerous criminal instead of a 70-pound 12-year-old girl. Her knees left small streaks of blood on the gray linoleum floor. Officer Daniels had her right arm twisted behind her back at an angle that made her shoulder scream. Officer Chin gripped her left arm so tight that bruises were already forming under her brown skin. "Stop fighting," Officer Daniels growled, even though Zuri wasn't fighting. She was crying. She was stumbling because they were moving too fast and her legs wouldn't cooperate and everything hurt. Behind them, Robert Williams followed, his phone still connected to James Henderson, providing a live audio feed of everything happening. "Mr. Henderson, they're taking her back. They're being rough with her. Too rough." On the other end of the line, James Henderson's voice was deadly calm in the way that precedes storms. "Keep following them. Don't hang up. I need you to be my eyes until I get there." The other airport workers they passed looked away. Some looked uncomfortable. One woman, another black employee in her 50s, had tears in her eyes. But nobody intervened. Nobody stopped it. This is what systemic racism looks like. It's not just the officers doing wrong. It's every person who sees wrong and chooses their paycheck over their conscience. When they reached the security office, Amara was standing by the door, her face streaked with tears. Malik had returned from the bathroom and stood beside her, both of them still handcuffed. When they saw Zuri, saw the blood on her knees, saw the way the officers were manhandling their sister, something broke in both of them. "What did you do to her?" Amara screamed, lunging forward. Officer Chin shoved her back into the room. "Sit down." They threw Zuri into a chair so hard it scraped across the floor. Her knees throbbed. Her shoulder felt like it might be dislocated. But worse than the physical pain was the humiliation, the degradation, the knowledge that they could do this to her and nobody would stop them. Officer Daniels loomed over her, his face inches from hers. "You think you're smart? You think you can just run from us?" "I was calling my dad," Zuri said through her tears. "That's all. I just wanted to call my dad." "You have no rights here except the ones we give you," the officer said, and that sentence should terrify anyone who understands what it means when authority figures believe they can grant or revoke human rights at will. This is what people don't understand about racial profiling and discrimination. It's not just about being treated unfairly. It's about being stripped of your humanity, your dignity, your constitutional rights, because someone decided your skin color makes you less deserving of protection under the law. These children had committed no crime. They had broken no law. But they were being treated worse than many actual criminals get treated. And why? Because a gate agent's implicit bias had decided they looked suspicious. Malik was shaking so violently his handcuffs rattled. Amara was trying to be strong for her siblings, but her resolve was crumbling. And Zuri, who'd been so brave to run and find help, felt that bravery turned to despair as she realized that even getting their father on the phone might not be enough to save them from this nightmare. Officer Daniels pulled out his radio. "Yeah, we got her. The one that ran." He paused, listening to something on his earpiece. His expression shifted and became harder. "Copy that. We're increasing the charges." Amara's stomach dropped. "Charges? What charges?" "Theft, fraud, and now resisting arrest and fleeing custody," Officer Chin said, almost casually, like she was reading a grocery list instead of potentially destroying 3 children's futures. "We didn't resist anything," Malik said, finding his voice despite his fear. "You grabbed us. You handcuffed us. We've been trying to cooperate." "That's not how we see it," Officer Daniels said. "And our report is what matters. This is the mechanism of injustice. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just people in positions of power rewriting reality to justify their own prejudice and brutality." These officers knew they'd crossed lines. They knew they'd used excessive force on children. So now they had to make the children into criminals to justify what they'd done. They had to add charges, escalate the situation, create a narrative where their actions seemed reasonable. Outside the room, Robert Williams stood with his phone pressed to his ear, describing everything to James Henderson in a low, urgent voice. "They're adding charges, Mr. Henderson. They're trying to make this bigger than it is." James Henderson's voice came through tight with barely controlled fury. "How far are you from the airport?" 25 minutes, maybe 30 with traffic. Drive faster." In that security office, time moved like honey. Minutes felt like hours. The triplets sat in their chairs, Zuri's knees still bleeding, all three of them handcuffed, all three of them processing trauma that would take years of therapy to unpack. They'd left home that morning as innocent children excited about a vacation. They would never be that innocent again. Officer Daniels opened a laptop and started typing his report. Every word he wrote was a lie. Every sentence he composed was designed to cover his department's misconduct by painting these children as criminals. He typed that they'd been aggressive. He typed that they'd refused to cooperate. He typed that Zuri had attacked an officer before fleeing. All lies. But lies that would go into an official report, would become part of a permanent record, would follow these children for years if their father couldn't stop it. Amara watched him type and understood something profound and terrible. The system wasn't broken. The system was working exactly as it was designed to work. It was designed to criminalize black bodies. It was designed to justify violence against black people. It was designed to protect officers who abuse their power while punishing victims who resist. Her father had tried to protect them from this knowledge. He'd built a successful life, moved them to a good neighborhood, sent them to good schools, taught them to be respectful and polite and dignified. He'd thought maybe, just maybe, he could shield them from the racism he'd experienced. But you can't shield black children from racism in America. You can only prepare them for it. And even preparation isn't enough when you're 12 years old and handcuffed in a windowless room while officers invent crimes to justify their hatred. Zuri looked at her siblings and whispered, "Daddy's coming." It was the only hope they had left. Officer Daniels finished typing his fabricated report and stood up, cracking his knuckles. The sound echoed in that small room like a threat. He walked over to where Zuri sat, her knees still bleeding, her face still wet with tears, and he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind of smile that enjoys power, that feeds on fear. "You know what happens to people who run from the police," he said quietly, so quietly that the security cameras wouldn't pick up his words, only his proximity to a child who couldn't defend herself. What happened next lasted less than 2 minutes but would scar the triplets for the rest of their lives. Officer Daniels grabbed Zuri by her hair, yanking her head back. She cried out in pain. Amara lunged from her chair, handcuffs and all, screaming for him to stop. Officer Chin grabbed Amara, slamming her back down so hard the chair legs screeched against the floor. Malik shouted, his voice breaking. "Leave her alone. Please. We didn't do anything." "But they did do something, didn't they?" Officer Daniels said, his hands still fisted in Zuri's hair. "They ran. They resisted. They disrespected authority." He shoved Zuri's head forward, then grabbed her arm and twisted it behind her back again, applying pressure to that shoulder he'd already injured. Zuri screamed, a sound of pure agony that no 12-year-old should ever have to make. This is what we don't see in the statistics about racial discrimination and police brutality. We see the numbers. We see the percentages. We see the reports. But we don't see moments like this. We don't see the individual acts of cruelty inflicted on black children by people who've been given badges and authority and who use both as weapons. "Stop it," Amara sobbed. "You're hurting her. Please stop hurting her." "Should have thought about that before you came here with stolen boarding passes," Officer Chin said, and the casualness in her voice was almost worse than Officer Daniels's violence. She didn't need to hurt the children herself. Her indifference was its own form of abuse. Officer Daniels released Zuri's arm and she collapsed forward, gasping for breath through her tears. But he wasn't done. He grabbed her face, forcing her to look at him. "When I ask you a question, you answer immediately. You understand?" Zuri nodded, too terrified to speak. "I can't hear you." "Yes," Zuri whispered. "Yes, sir." "Who gave you those boarding passes?" "Our dad bought them." "Wrong answer." Officer Daniels backhanded her across the face. The slap echoed in the room like a gunshot. Zuri's head snapped to the side, her cheek immediately reddening with the imprint of his hand. Amara screamed. Malik screamed. Both of them tried to stand, to get to their sister, but Officer Chen moved between them and Zuri, her hand on her baton now, a clear threat. "Sit down or you're next," she said. Outside the door, Robert Williams heard the slap, heard the children's screams, and his hands shook with rage and helplessness. "Mr. Henderson," he said into the phone, his voice cracking. "Sir, they just hit her. They just hit your daughter." The sound that came through the phone wasn't quite human. It was the sound of a father hearing that his child has been harmed and being powerless to stop it. "I'm 15 minutes away," James Henderson said, and his voice had gone beyond anger into something colder, something more dangerous. "You tell them. You tell those officers that James Henderson is coming. You tell them who I am." But Robert couldn't get into that room. The door was locked from the inside. All he could do was stand there and listen and bear witness to abuse he was powerless to prevent. Inside, Officer Daniels leaned close to Zuri again. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Where did you really get those boarding passes?" Zuri's face throbbed. Her shoulder screamed. Her knees bled. Her spirit was breaking. But somewhere deep inside, she found a spark of the dignity her father had instilled in her, the strength her ancestors had passed down through generations of surviving worse than this. She looked Officer Daniels in the eye and said, clearly despite her tears, "My father, James Henderson, bought them legally. And when he gets here, you're going to wish you'd believed me the first time." Officer Daniels raised his hand again. Amara closed her eyes. She couldn't watch her sister get hit again. She couldn't bear it. They were trapped in this room with these monsters in uniforms and nobody was coming to save them, and even when their father arrived, would it be enough? Could anything be enough to undo what was being done to them at this moment? This is the reality of racial profiling. It doesn't stop at inconvenience. It doesn't stop at humiliation. It escalates to violence, to abuse, to trauma that will require years of healing. These children came to an airport to catch a flight to Orlando. They would leave with invisible wounds that might never fully close. Officer Daniels's hand came down again, striking Zuri on the side of her head. Her ear rang. The room spun. She tasted blood in her mouth where she'd bitten her tongue. Malik was crying so hard he could barely breathe. Amara was screaming threats she had no power to enforce. And Zuri, brave Zuri who'd run for help, who'd found Robert, who'd gotten their father on the phone, felt something inside her shatter. She'd done everything right. She'd been polite. She'd followed rules her whole life. She'd made honor roll, volunteered in her community, been kind to everyone. And none of it mattered. None of it protected her. Because to Officer Daniels, she wasn't an honor student or a sister or a daughter or a human being with rights and dignity. She was just another black child he could hurt without consequence. Or so he thought. Because 15 minutes away, James Henderson was running red lights in his Mercedes, and he was calling in favors from people in very high places, and he was preparing to rain down consequences that Officer Daniels couldn't begin to imagine. But Zuri didn't know that yet. In that moment, in that room, with her face burning and her sister sobbing and her brother shaking, all she knew was pain and fear and the crushing weight of injustice. Officer Daniels finally stepped back, flexing his hand like hitting children was hard work. Officer Chen uncuffed all 3 triplets only to recuff them with their hands in front instead of behind, a small mercy that felt like cruelty given everything else. "Don't move," Officer Daniels said. "Don't speak unless spoken to. And don't even think about running again." The 3 children huddled together as much as their restraints would allow. Amara whispered to Zuri, "Daddy's coming. Hold on. Daddy's coming." And in the maintenance corridor outside, Robert Williams continued his vigil, his phone still connected to James Henderson, bearing witness to injustice because sometimes witnessing is all we can do until help arrives. James Henderson's phone buzzed against the dashboard of his Mercedes as he wove through Saturday afternoon traffic on I-95. He'd already made 3 calls. 1 to his lawyer. 1 to the head of airport security. 1 to someone even higher up whose name doesn't matter but whose power does. Now another call was coming in, and he answered it with 1 word. "What?" "Mr. Henderson, this is Margaret Chin from the Philadelphia office. We have a situation with the Nakamoto merger. The Japanese team is threatening to walk if we don't. I don't care, James said, cutting her off. Handle it. Sir, this is a $400 million deal. You've been working on this for 6 months. They're demanding to speak with you directly or they're pulling out. They're at the office right now. James Henderson had built his fortune through careful decisions, strategic partnerships, and knowing when to prioritize. He'd started with nothing, a black kid from West Philadelphia who'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, then Temple, then Wharton. He'd spent 20 years building Henderson Capital Management into one of the most successful private equity firms on the East Coast. He'd made billionaires out of millionaires and had become one himself in the process. The Nakamoto merger represented months of negotiations, flights to Tokyo, carefully crafted proposals. For $100 million. A deal that would cement his firm's expansion into Asian markets. And right now, he didn't give a damn about any of it. Tell them we'll reschedule, he said. Mr. Henderson, they won't reschedule. It's now or never. If you don't come back to the office in the next hour, we lose everything. Then we lose everything, James said, and ended the call. He tried his children's phones again. Amara first. Straight to voicemail. Zuri next. Voicemail. Malik. Voicemail. All 3 phones off or dead or confiscated, and each unanswered ring felt like a knife twisting in his chest. His phone buzzed again. Another business crisis. Another fire that needed putting out. He declined the call. Then another. Declined. Then his assistant. Declined. James Henderson had spent his entire adult life building an empire. He'd sacrificed time with his children, missed soccer games and school plays and lazy Sunday mornings because he was building something. Building wealth. Building security. Building a life where his children would never experience the poverty he'd known, the discrimination he'd faced, the doors that had been slammed in his face because of his skin color. He'd thought money could protect them. He'd thought success could shield them. He'd bought them the best of everything, sent them to top schools, moved them to a neighborhood where they'd be safe. He'd made himself so successful, so wealthy, so connected that he believed his children would be insulated from the racism he'd endured. And in one morning at one airport, with one bigoted gate agent, all of that had been proven false. His phone rang again. Robert Williams. Talk to me, James said. They're still in there. I can hear them crying. The officers won't let me in. The airport security supervisor just arrived. I told him who you are. He's trying to get answers, but those officers locked the door. How far am I? James looked at his GPS. 10 minutes. The longest 10 minutes of his life. His phone buzzed with a text from his business partner. Call me immediately. Nakamoto walking. Jenkins deal collapsing. Where are you? He didn't respond. Another text. This one from his lawyer. Got through to the airport police chief. He's trying to reach the officers. Sending someone to that security office now. Hold tight. But James Henderson was done holding tight. He was done trusting systems. He was done believing that doing everything right would protect his children from people who saw black skin and assumed criminality. Traffic slowed ahead. An accident in the right lane. Cars merging left. He checked his mirrors and swerved onto the shoulder, accelerating past the gridlock. His Mercedes bumped over uneven pavement. Horns blared behind him. He didn't care. His phone rang again. Margaret Chin, persistent. He answered this time. What? Sir, the Nakamoto team just left. The deal is dead. Mr. Henderson, do you understand what this means? We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Your reputation. The firm's future in Asian markets. My children, James said slowly, deliberately, are handcuffed in an airport security office because a racist gate agent decided they looked suspicious. My 12-year-old daughter just got slapped across the face by a police officer. My reputation? The firm's future? None of that means a goddamn thing if I can't protect my own children. There was silence on the other end. I need you to understand something, Margaret, James continued, his voice deadly calm. I built this company with my bare hands. I can rebuild it again. But I only get one chance to be the father my children need right now. So the Nakamoto deal is dead. Let it die. I'll deal with the consequences later. He ended the call. 5 minutes away now. His children were suffering. His children were scared. His children had called him for help and he'd been too far away to answer. That failure burned worse than any business loss ever could. The exit for Philadelphia International Airport appeared ahead. James took it fast, tires squealing slightly. His phone buzzed constantly now. Text after text. Call after call. His business empire was crumbling in real time. Partners panicking. Deals falling apart. Money evaporating. And he felt nothing but urgency to get to his children. This is what people don't understand about being a successful black person in America. You can have billions. You can have power. You can have connections. But when your children are being brutalized because of their skin color, all of that means nothing. You're just another black parent, desperate and furious and racing against time. 3 minutes away. Robert's voice came through the car speakers. The call still connected. Mr. Henderson, the supervisor, is at the door now. He's demanding they open it. They're not responding. 2 minutes. James Henderson pulled into the airport approach, bypassing the terminal drop-off areas, heading straight for the restricted parking where airport authority vehicles were stationed. A security guard stepped out to wave him away. James pulled up anyway, lowered his window. James Henderson. My children are being held in your security office. Where is it? The guard's expression changed when he heard the name. He'd gotten the alert 5 minutes ago. All units be advised, James Henderson en route, approach with caution. Not because James was dangerous, but because when billionaires show up angry at your workplace, careers tend to end. Terminal C, restricted area, the guard said, stepping aside. Sir, I'll escort you. No need, James said. I know where I'm going. He parked illegally, didn't bother locking the car and ran. 60 seconds. James Henderson burst through the doors of Terminal C like a force of nature. His 6'2" frame moved with purpose, his Italian suit slightly rumpled from the drive, his face a mask of controlled fury that made airport employees step aside without being asked. He'd made calls in the car. The right calls. To the right people. And now he was here, and everything was about to change. Robert Williams saw him first and rushed forward. Mr. Henderson. They're down this corridor. The supervisor's been trying to get them to open the door, but they won't. Take me there. They moved quickly through the restricted area, past offices and storage rooms, until they reached a small hallway where 5 people stood outside a locked door. An airport security supervisor in a white shirt and tie. 2 other officers looking uncomfortable. A woman from airport administration with a tablet. And a man in an expensive suit who James recognized immediately. David Morrison, regional director of operations for the airline. They'd met twice at industry conferences. Morrison's face went pale when he saw James approaching. James, Morrison said, stepping forward with his hand extended, a nervous smile on his face. I just heard about this situation. I'm sure it's all a misunderstanding. James walked past the extended hand like it didn't exist. Open that door. We're trying to. The officers inside aren't responding to radio or. I said open that door. James's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The authority in it was absolute. The supervisor fumbled with a master keycard. His hands shook as he swiped it. The lock clicked. The door opened. The scene inside that security office would be burned into James Henderson's memory forever. His 3 children, his babies, huddled together in chairs against the far wall. Handcuffed. Amara's face streaked with tears. Malik shaking like a leaf. And Zuri. Sweet Zuri with her mother's eyes and her father's determination. Zuri with blood on her knees and a swollen red mark across her cheek and her ear still bright red from being struck. Officer Daniels stood near the desk, arms crossed. Officer Chin sat at the computer. Both turned when the door opened. Both froze when they saw James Henderson. James moved to his children first. Always the children first. He knelt in front of them, his expensive suit pants touching that dirty floor, and his hands trembled as he reached for their faces. Baby girl, he whispered to Zuri, touching her swollen cheeks so gently. Oh baby girl. Daddy, Zuri sobbed, and the word broke something in James that no amount of money could ever fix. Who put handcuffs on my children? James said quietly, not turning around yet, his eyes still on his babies. Behind him, Officer Daniels found his voice. Sir, these minors were detained for suspected theft and fraud. They had suspicious boarding passes and one of them fled custody. James stood slowly, turned slowly, and the look on his face made Officer Daniels take an involuntary step backward. Suspicious boarding passes. Suspicious. That's the word you used? The boarding passes appeared fraudulent, Officer Chin said, but her voice wavered. James pulled out his phone, pulled up his airline account, turned the screen so everyone could see. 3 tickets. First class. Philadelphia to Orlando. Flight 2847. Purchased 4 days ago. Confirmation number right here. Charged to my American Express card. My name is on the account. My children's names are on the tickets. What exactly was fraudulent? The room had filled with people now. Morrison, the supervisor, Robert Williams, the administrator, and more officers drawn by the commotion. Everyone watching. Everyone witnessing. They became belligerent, Officer Daniels said, grasping for justification. They refused to cooperate. My daughter has a handprint on her face, James said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming even more dangerous. Did she become belligerent before or after you struck her? Silence. Morrison stepped forward, trying to regain control. James, I assure you this will be fully investigated. We take these matters very seriously. If there was any misconduct. James turned to face him fully. If there was misconduct? My 12-year-old daughter has been assaulted by your security personnel. My children have been handcuffed and terrorized for the crime of being black in an airport. And you're talking about if? Let me get these restraints off the children, the supervisor said quickly, moving forward with a handcuff key. Don't touch them, James said. Nobody touches my children except me. He took the key from the supervisor's hand and carefully, gently removed the handcuffs from each of his children. The metal had left marks on their wrists. Zuri's right wrist was already bruised. When the last cuff came off, all 3 children threw themselves at their father, clinging to him, sobbing. James held them. Just held them. Let them cry into his suit jacket. Let them shake against him. Let them feel safe for the first time in hours. And over their heads, his eyes moved from Officer Daniels to Officer Chin to the gate agent who'd been brought to the office and stood in the doorway looking terrified. I want names, James said. Everyone involved. The gate agent who made the initial accusation. Every crew member who supported her. Every officer who touched my children. Every supervisor who allowed this to happen. I want every single name. Morrison pulled out his tablet. James, let's discuss this privately. I'm sure we can reach an understanding. An understanding. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. You think this is something we're going to settle quietly? You think I'm going to take some hush money and let this disappear? We can offer compensation. Full refund of the tickets, travel vouchers, perhaps a settlement for your trouble. My trouble? James's voice finally rose. My children were racially profiled. They were accused of theft. They were handcuffed. They were assaulted. My daughter was struck in the face by a police officer. And you want to give me travel vouchers? Morrison's professional smile was cracking. What would you like us to do, James? James Henderson stood, his children still clinging to him. What I'd like is to turn back time and prevent this from happening. Since I can't do that, here's what's going to happen instead. You're going to give me access to every security camera in this terminal. Every angle of what happened at that gate. Every second of footage from this room. And then tomorrow morning, I'm calling an emergency board meeting. The color drained from Morrison's face. Sims, you can't. I can't? James smiled now, and it was terrifying. David, do you know how much money I have invested in this airline? Do you know what percentage of shares Henderson Capital Management controls? Morrison knew. Everyone in that room who understood corporate finance knew. James Henderson wasn't just a billionaire. He was one of the airline's largest institutional investors. 47%, James said quietly. I control 47% of your airline's stock. And Monday morning, I'm pulling every single dollar of it. The room went silent. 47%. Billions of dollars. The kind of withdrawal that could crater a company's stock price, trigger panic selling, destroy market confidence. James, Morrison said desperately. Let's not be hasty. Think about what you're saying. I'm thinking, James said. I'm thinking about my children's faces. I'm thinking about that handprint on my daughter's cheek. I'm thinking about how your employees saw 3 black children with first-class tickets and immediately assumed they were criminals. And I'm thinking that any company that allows that kind of racism doesn't deserve my money. He looked at Officer Daniels and Officer Chin, both standing frozen, both beginning to understand what they'd done. You brutalized children today. My children. And you did it because you looked at their beautiful black skin and decided they were threats. Well, here's a real threat for you. When I'm done, you won't just lose your jobs. You'll never work in law enforcement again. I'll make sure of it. By Monday morning at 9 a.m., the financial world was watching Henderson Capital Management pull $4.3 billion from Transatlantic Airlines. The withdrawal hit the markets like an earthquake. Stock price dropped 18% in the first hour, 26% by lunch. Panic selling spread as other institutional investors followed James Henderson's lead, afraid of being left holding worthless shares. The airline's CEO, Richard Pemberton, called James personally. His voice shook with barely controlled desperation. James, please. We can fix this. Tell me what you want. I told you what I want, James said calmly, sitting in his home office while his children recovered in their rooms upstairs. Justice. Accountability. Real change. We've suspended the employees involved. We're conducting a full investigation. Suspended? James laughed bitterly. Not fired. Suspended. With pay, I assume? Silence on the other end confirmed it. By Tuesday, the stock had dropped 34%. The airline's market capitalization had evaporated by billions. Credit rating agencies issued warnings. Creditors started making calls. The board of directors held an emergency meeting that lasted 11 hours. Wednesday brought layoffs. Not the racist employees who'd caused this catastrophe. Regular workers. Baggage handlers, gate agents, maintenance crews. People who had nothing to do with what happened to the Henderson triplets but who would pay the price anyway because that's how corporate America works. The innocent suffer while the guilty get golden parachutes. James watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction mixed with guilt. He hadn't wanted regular workers to lose their jobs. But he also hadn't started this. The airline had made a choice when they hired people who saw black children as criminals. When they created a culture where racial profiling was accepted. When they failed to train their employees properly or hold them accountable. By Thursday, 3 more major investors had pulled out. The airline announced they were seeking emergency financing. The news media picked up the story. Not just business channels. Everyone. CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for the Henderson triplets. The security camera footage James had obtained leaked online. Millions watched Officer Daniels slap a 12-year-old girl across the face. Millions watched 3 children being handcuffed and terrorized. The public outrage was immediate and overwhelming. Boycotts organized. Protests erupted at major airports. Civil rights organizations issued statements. The NAACP demanded federal investigation. The Department of Transportation opened an inquiry. By Friday morning, Transatlantic Airlines stock had dropped 48%. The company was hemorrhaging money. They were facing lawsuits. Their reputation was destroyed. And Richard Pemberton called James Henderson again. This time, his voice wasn't desperate. It was defeated. Tell me what you want, he said. Please. Before there's nothing left to save. James Henderson sat across from Richard Pemberton and the airline's entire board of directors in a Philadelphia conference room. His lawyers sat beside him. The airline's lawyers filled half the table. Everyone looked exhausted except James. My terms are non-negotiable, James said. First, every employee involved in what happened to my children is fired immediately. Not suspended. Not reassigned. Fired. The gate agent, the crew members who supported her, Officer Daniels, Officer Chin, and every supervisor who allowed this to continue. Pemberton nodded, taking notes. Done. Second, you implement mandatory bias training for every single employee. Real training, not some 4-hour seminar. Ongoing education about racial profiling, implicit bias, and civil rights. And you bring in outside consultants to audit your company culture. Agreed. Third, you create a passenger bill of rights specifically addressing discrimination. Clear procedures for reporting bias. Third-party oversight. Real consequences for violations. Fourth, $10 million in damages. $5 million to my children for their trauma. $5 million to establish a foundation that provides legal support for travelers who experience discrimination. Pemberton's hand shook as he wrote. That's acceptable. James leaned forward. And one more thing. I want a full-page ad in the New York Times, Washington Post, and every major newspaper. Your company apologizing publicly for what happened to my children. Acknowledging the racial profiling. Admitting you failed them. The room was silent. We'll do it, Pemberton finally said. The agreement was signed that afternoon. Officer Daniels and Officer Chen were fired by evening, their certifications under review. The gate agent disappeared from public view. The crew members who'd supported her found themselves unemployed. The airline implemented every change James demanded. But 6 months later, when James asked his children if they wanted to fly anywhere, all 3 said no. The money couldn't erase what happened in that security office. The policies couldn't remove the handprint from Zuri's memory. The apologies couldn't give them back their innocence. Some victories, James realized, are hollow. Justice had been served. But his children would carry those scars forever. If this story made you feel something, if it opened your eyes to the reality of racial profiling that still happens every single day in airports, schools, stores, and streets across this country, then do something about it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because we're committed to sharing stories that expose injustice and demand change. Drop a comment below telling us your experience with discrimination or profiling. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. And if you believe that no child should ever experience what Amara, Zuri, and Malik went through, let your voice be heard. Because silence is complicity. And change only happens when enough people refuse to stay silent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember, this isn't just their story. This is our story. All of us.